Hello, and welcome to the SaWGuy podcast.
Like scary movies. What's your favorite scary movie?
Here's Johnny.
We'll tear your soul apart.
The boogeyman is real, and you found him.
Game over, man. Game over.
What do you want?
I want to hear you scream. From the front time, bitch!
Welcome to the SaWGuy podcast. You're joining me right now for episode 6, and this is part 2 of Friday the 13th series on Jason fucking Voorhees. Woo! All right. I got excited about the first part of the episode, talking about the first 5 films. Now, this one is going to be talking about from part 6 all the way up through the reboot. So, if you're not good at math, it's a total of 12 films between the 2 episodes. So without further ado, let's get started, right? So, as I told you about the first part of the episode, Jason and this whole storyline with him about how he was able to endure all the pain, all the fucking stabbings, axes to the head, and had that incredible freaking strength and shit. Well, anyways, I believe, because they never explain it in the movie, everybody has their own saying to it. Everyone says, oh, maybe he was a demon, maybe he was possessed, this and this and that, you know, and it made sense later on. But what I believe the reason why Jason was so strong and so agile and everything has to do with the fact that from a medical standpoint, and this is what I think. Now, this is my opinion, nobody else's. I think with Jason, since he was missing a few different chromosomes, and since he was not normal, what I believe is that he had incredible strength and he had a high pain tolerance. That's the only reason why he can able to move around so quick and do all that stuff, you know, have that incredible strength, and then take the fact that he fell off fucking barns and shit and he was getting beat up, had an axe to the head. That was the only thing to explain it in the original series. Now, since we're talking about part 6 all the way up, right? So let's get into part 6. Part 6 was Jason Lives, right? So you had the first 4 that happened. Part 5 was the one and done. Part 6 came back to the Tommy Jarvis character. So part 6 basically was part 1 through 4's sequel. They basically skipped part 5, like part 5 never happened. I didn't mention in the first in the first part. But the way that part 5 ended was that Tommy Jarvis snaps and he thinks that he's Jason. And then he ends up like, it ends on a cliffhanger where, dun dun dun, he's wearing a Jason mask, right? But he's wearing the Roy one. He's not wearing the normal one. That's what I believe, or at least remember. But anyways, they cancel all that. So they go into part 6. In part 6, he breaks away from that institution. And basically, him and his buddy, they go and find the grave because he doesn't believe Jason's dead. You know, he's not all there thinking that Jason's not dead. He goes to the gravesite, Jason is freaking dead. But then he just snaps. So him and his buddy, they basically dig up the grave and they see Jason's cold corpse. He snaps, starts beating the shit out of it, kicking him and putting a shovel in him. Well, they basically did it like Frankenstein. He puts a metal pole in him. It's raining. Lightning hits it. Jason's reanimated and comes back to life. Kills his buddy, rips his heart out. Then he starts throwing gasoline on him. Then it starts raining. And then basically Jason comes back. And it was a pretty cool concept how they brought him back. Because part 6 is, I believe, one of the better sequels out of all of them. The way how he comes back. Because now at this point, he's a mummified zombie. He's more of a monster than anything. And the fact that he's already been dead means that he can't be killed. You know? That's what they implied in the beginning of part 6. So part 6 goes to the whole story of Tommy Jarvis, goes back to, you know, the sheriff, tells him, hey, Jason's alive. They think he's fucking around. So anyways, it goes to that whole story about, you know, the kids that go back to this, you know, the campground. And basically it's kind of a rehash of all the normal Friday the 13th, like from part, which one was it where they go back to the campground? I think it was part 2, 3-ish. No, part 2. Part 2 is where they go back and they try to reopen the campground. And so that's what happens in part 6. But instead, you see everybody all getting together. But then you find out that when Jason's alive, he catches 2 of them trying to get there because they get lost. And I think it's funny because in the scene where Jason sees the first camp counselors and killed him, that's when they started more in the comedic role, saying, "Oh, whenever I see a guy in a mask and he's big, he doesn't look too friendly." And I don't know the name of the girl actor, but I know the guy actor was freaking Tony Goldwyn, which is funny. He's a bad guy off of Ghost and some other films that he's done. But he got his start in Hollywood because of a Jason film. Case in point. But anyways, there's a lot of advertisement in that one. So he kills off Tony Goldwyn. He sees the chick. She tries to offer him money. He kills her, and then you see American Express car just floating away in the little pond. Thought it was kind of interesting how they did that. But the whole story goes on part 6. That was like the most Hollywood version. Because he had Alice Cooper involved with it, doing the soundtrack and everything. But the whole story goes, Jason's back. He's killing off the counselors little by little. And they kind of gave him more... They try to get away from that whole work... Well, not the work suit. They try to get away from the jumpsuit. Because they didn't want him being compared to Michael Myers at the time. So they gave him like a work shirt, work pants, and then later on he catches these people playing paintball and shit. He kills them, and then he takes their gear, and he's wearing yellow gloves, which is interesting, you know, because he never wore gloves, but he always had like his basic hands. But at this point, you know, Jason's been buried, he turns more into a zombie, and then it goes into the whole story of where, you know, the cop thinks Tommy Jarvis is lying, and back and forth, and then at the end, Jason just goes on a killing spree, killing people. And I thought it was interesting because they actually show the kids in the campground, like the young kids, like maybe 9 to 11 years old, and he didn't do anything to them. He didn't try to hurt them or anything. He breaks through one of the campgrounds and then they run away, but he was going after like the adults and everything. But the whole story in the series on that one is that he was going after Tommy Jarvis. And basically this was the last film that you hear anything about Tommy Jarvis until they released the video game of it. But when they did that, they basically, you know, they brought him back. And what Tommy Jarvis was trying to do was trying to send him back to the watery grave. Because he knows Jason, that's how he died, was through the watery grave. But anyways, so he rigs up this boat, rigs up a chain, and he gets the chain on Jason with this big old rock to hold him down. And end of the movie. You know, the boat breaks, Jason goes down, things like that. And that was the last you ever hear of Tommy Jarvis. And then part 7 comes around. Part 7 I thought was an interesting take. It had a little bit less believable sense to it, you know. But what I liked about part 7 was they tied in telekinesis. So part 7 was basically that same area where Jason was, you know, drowned and put into the watery grave. They had this chick with telekinesis go back to the spot because I guess she had killed her dad and everything like that, going crazy, seeing things, moving things. But part 7 was more comedic, and it had the same story as part 4, where they were all, you know, they already had lived there, and then you had these other group of kids living across the way. Then they have a party, and then Jason breaks out because basically the girl with telekinesis, she tries to raise her father, and she ends up raising Jason out of the water. So anyways, the whole story goes, Jason's back, he's killing everybody, he's more zombified looking, his mask is all broken and fucked up, which was pretty cool, you know, how they did all that. And then she basically puts him back to a watery grave. She summons her ghost dad to come down. He puts him back in the watery grave. Everything falls on Jason. End of part 7. Part 7 was okay. It's just... Then you had part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Now, that was actually a good concept. You know, Jason in the city and everything. But what they should have did was Jason on his way to Manhattan. Because the whole movie was basically based on these kids. They're graduating. Jason is brought back to life, and he basically follows these kids on a boat, and they're going on a cruise ship boat ride to Manhattan, and basically the boat goes down, they float away into Manhattan, Jason falls into Manhattan, he's in the city for about 20 minutes, and it was a cool concept, don't get me wrong. I think it could have been a lot better, but, you know, if you watch the documentaries and you hear the documentaries, they were tight on budget. So that's why they had to change it so last minute to where it was mostly on the boat. Kind of a little disappointing, but, you know, you still had over-the-top kills. You know, you had him picking up one of those sauna rocks, putting it through a guy. He basically had him picking up a guitar and killing one of the rocker chicks on there. So part 8, it was disappointing story-wise, but you had gruesome kills over the top. It was Jason, right? Jason fucking Voorhees. And then that ended the series between 6, 7, and 8, you know. That, and I want to say it was probably about 3 years before they made another Jason film. Then they did the Final Friday, Jason Goes to Hell. I think that's the name of it. The Final Friday, Jason Goes to Hell. So basically, it was a one and done. You already know who Jason is. It was basically all these cops. They're trying to set up Jason in the camp. They set him up, and the girl cop, she basically runs out of the cabin that she was staying at, and they set up Jason, and then they just annihilate him. They fucking shoot him up, blow a mortar on him and everything, and then he's blown up. Then the whole credits roll. Then you see his carcass comes in, and then for some reason his heart turns the doctor crazy, and then he ends up eating his heart, and then Jason transfers his soul and himself into like different vessels, like different bodies and shit. And the whole story goes is that he's trying to find a Voorhees relative to kill, so that way once he kills him, he can regenerate himself into a full-grown, like, normal body. Which is weird, I know. The costume looked badass, how they did it, the whole suit. But the only thing that was different is that they did him in a full jumpsuit, similar to Michael, but they did the skin all bubbly and all fucked up. They did the Jason mask, but they did a metal mask like it was strapped into his head super, super tight, which was pretty cool. And then the whole storyline is that they were trying to treat Jason as he was an entity or a spirit. So they had to get this custom dagger or whatever, and they stab him in the heart with it. Then these demons from hell would pull him down. And then at the end, of course, we all know, they did the wink where Freddy's arm comes out, pulls the mask back into hell. Which, that's actually a badass concept how they did it. But I mean, the idea was cool. The story was, I mean, I get where they were trying to go, but it wasn't executed right, you know? That's the only thing I would say to it. But for what it was, Part 9 was okay for itself being a one and done. But it really wasn't a one and done because then it ties into later on Freddy vs. Jason. But before Freddy vs. Jason came out, in between that time frame, in 2003 they did Jason X. And it was actually a pretty cool concept because they were trying to do the same thing what they did in Manhattan, Part 8, was to take Jason out of the campground and put him somewhere. Well, Jason X, you already know who Jason is in the story. He's captured, then he breaks out, and then he stabs one of the scientists, and, you know, it's a cryogenesis, and then they both get frozen. It's like 1,000 years into the future. And then, for some reason, they're in space. Earth is falling apart. And it sounds like a movie now you would see on the Sci-Fi Channel. But for what it was in 2003, you didn't have, like, Sci-Fi Channel doing, like, movies and shit like that. You know, like off-sequels or TV-made sequels. You didn't see too much of that with, like, the main horror icons. But for what it was, Jason X was pretty cool. Because they took Jason out of the element. They showed that he actually got fucked up and destroyed. You know, blowing his arm off, blow his leg off, and... But what was cool is that they actually reinvented Jason in this. And a lot of people got pissed because of the way how they reinvented him. They call him Uber Jason. I don't know where the Uber name came from, but I would say Space Jason. But anyways, what they did is that for Jason in this one, they have these little ants that like repairs them and shit in the story. And so that's how they repaired the victim that he got frozen with and killed. Or thought he killed. But anyways, they go into the whole story of how they basically rebuild him. They give him a metal leg, metal part of his chest, metal arm. He has this badass futuristic looking machete, and his whole face and mask had been redone. So I mean, it was pretty cool how they did it. You know, they actually gave him both red eyes, and basically the whole story goes they're in space, they blow up, and then Jason falls out from the space, you know, and his mask comes off and lands in the lake at Earth 2. And they were going to continue the story, but obviously not a lot of people liked it. The budget wasn't there. But they did continue the story in comic form. So if you follow comics and shit like that, and if you really like the Jason X series, Google up the Jason X series, the comic series. And I think they did like Jason X versus regular Jason, or Uber Jason versus past Jason, something like that. But if you're really into horror films like I am, you know, they're pretty cool. You know, check that out. But after they did that one, then the sequel for the Final Friday, Jason Goes to Hell, they finally did the sequel to it when they did Freddy vs. Jason. That came out in 2003. Jason X came out in 2001. I fucked that one up. Yeah. Jason X came out in 2001. Freddy vs. Jason came out in 2003. And that was actually a cool crossover because that was the first time you ever see two horror icons go head to head. And the way they did the story is that, Freddy Krueger, he needed Jason's help to get fear into the kids so he can come back. Then Jason crosses him by killing all the victims that he was trying to get. And it goes to this whole war between each other back and forth. And the whole story and concept on that one was just badass. And it was just, of course, you got to have over-the-top kills. The fact where he's going to the cornfield just gutting everybody up. And then you see the main battle where him and Freddy are fighting. I mean, it was probably about a good 10, 11 years to actually get that movie off the ground and out of hell. Or movie hell is what they call it, to actually get it funded and produced and everything. Then they did that film. And for the longest time, you didn't hear anything about Freddy vs. Jason until 5 years after that. In 2008 is when they filmed it, but they released it in 2009. They did a full-blown reboot. And what's cool about the reboot is that, they didn't fuck with any of the horror fans. They already knew that we knew who Jason was. So in the credits of the reboot, they show everything that happened from the first one. How Pamela Voorhees went crazy. She saw her baby drown. And so they basically show in the credits that, she gets her head chopped off. And then it starts in basically kind of like part 2. So it's a mixture. The reboot is basically a mixture of 1, 2, and 3 all put together in one film. But they redid Jason as a whole character. So basically the whole reboot was, you already know what happens. Then it starts the story. He kills the campground, the people that are going. And the way it started is that they weren't going to the campground just to go to the campground. They were going there trying to look for marijuana plants. Then he just gets pissed off and just kills everybody. He kills everybody except one person. And it has to tie into, like, in part 2 when he sees a chick that reminds him of his mom. So he captures her. Then later on in the story, in the reboot, you see these kids just going up to their cabin or whatever, and then you see this other guy trying to look for his sister. So it kind of ties in part 1 through 4 a little bit, like all that whole concept. Then Jason is basically, killing these kids one by one. It shows how he gets his mask, which is bad fucking ass. It's basically the same mask, they just show a lot of wear and tear on it, and it was actually pretty cool how they did it. But then later on in the story, you see that Jason doesn't use the machete as much. He uses whatever he can get his hands on, an axe or whatever. Kills everybody off in one by one fashion. The way that he did it in the movie, they made it more... They didn't make him like he was stupid, or that he wasn't all there. He still had that same concept, but they made him more... I think in this one, this is my opinion. I don't know what y'all think about the reboot. I think they made him more like a hunter, which is badass. He was very territorial because they showed that he stayed in the same area. He never, left that same campground. He had all underground tunnels, and it showed why he was so quick. The only thing I didn't like, though, is because Jason doesn't run. They showed him fucking running in this, and it's like, okay, well, I can live with the fact that he was running. But then it also explains why he was so quick, how he went from, like, one end to the other, because he had all underground tunnels. He was a hunter. He was very territorial, And the way they end it, he basically gets stuck on a farm machine, gets pulled back, grinds up and shit. And then later on it shows that he was still alive. And I was hoping they were going to do a sequel. But then, the whole Friday the 13th series, it's just, man, that whole series just been in hell. Because everybody wants to own the names and the rights and all that shit to it. But anyways, the reboot was really good for what it was. If you've never seen the reboot... It's damn good. I mean, I'm not a fan of remakes, but if you do a remake right the way it should, I mean, you can fucking be fantastic at it. And that's what they did with this one. But the problem is, they stole all the ideas from the first to part 4. They got all those same concepts and they put it in one film. Now, if you did it that way, how the hell are you going to make a sequel, right? There was ideas that they were going to do like a TV show where he was a kid. There was ideas saying that they were going to do one in the winter where he has a beard and he's more territorial, which would have been another cool concept. But, the whole rights and the name to Friday the 13th and the Jason character was going from Paramount to New Line Cinema and back and forth. Paramount, they own it, obviously, because they did the first, 8 films? Yeah, all the way up to Jason Takes Manhattan. Part 9, all the way on up, was done by New Line Cinema. And when they wanted to do the reboot, they gave them the okay. But when they wanted to do the sequel, it's like, okay, well, it made a shit ton of money. We want our cut into it. So they really haven't done anything since 2009 with the Jason franchise, which kind of sucks because we're all kind of left out on it. But what I like about the whole Freddy. Freddy's later on. I'll do another Freddy episode. But anyways, with the whole Jason series, what they did is that, like I said in the previous episode, in part 1 of this, every single one of the Jason films was so different that they could be their own film. It pushed the boundaries for a lot of things. And, you know, without Jason, you wouldn't have, you know, slasher films as crazy as they are now, you know. And with Jason, another funny thing is that every Jason was played by a different character, except you had one guy by the name of Kane Hodder. He's a cool guy. If you ever get a chance to go to a horror convention, meet him. He's badass. But anyways, Kane Hodder, he was the only one that played Jason more than once. He played it in part 7, which is the New Blood, the telekinesis. Jason Takes Manhattan, which he ends up throwing one of the stuntmans who ends up being the Jason for Freddy vs. Jason, Ken Kersinger. And then he did Jason Goes to Hell, Jason X, but he didn't do Freddy vs. Jason. So there was a big uproar in that, why a lot of people didn't see that one. But Ken Kersinger, as I said, he was a stuntman that worked with him on part 8. He ended up being Jason. And I think they wanted him as Jason because he was a bigger, burly guy. And they wanted him to, like, be a statue over fucking Freddy. And, you know, you can't go wrong with that. But when they did the reboot, they got Derek Mears. He's another big, burly guy. And he's actually a pretty cool actor because he's done other films. He's in the Hatchet remake. He did some other films. He also did, what was the other one he did? He did The Predators, the one with Robert Rodriguez, the one that he did. He played the original Predator, which is pretty cool. You know, he did different characters. And if you talk about the original, I know the first Jason from very first Friday the 13th film, it was he was a kid at the time. His name's Ari Lehman, and he's still around, but he doesn't play Jason. But, you know, he still holds that record that he's first Jason. Part 2 and 3, I can't recall the actors, but I know the actor who played Jason in Part 3, he passed away. Part 4 was Ted White. He was kind of like more of a cowboy western actor. Part 5, I don't know Part 5, which actor played him or which stunt guy. I'll have to look at my research. And then I'll have to post it on Facebook and Twitter to remind you guys. Or remind me, you know. So if I fuck up on these comments, you know, let me know. You know, that's why there's a comments here on YouTube and on Facebook and everything. But anyways, out of all the actors that played him, I think the best character that really played him the best has to be Kane Hodder. And what's funny about Kane Hodder, he came back recently to play Jason in the video game. They did the whole motion capture and everything. So he's still on top of the list. He's number 1 Jason. Ken Kersinger, I thought, did pretty good for being a big burly guy and not really doing much of Jason or kind of like horror characters or anything like that. But for playing Jason, he was fucking fantastic, you know. But it was pretty interesting how they did all that and the way how they do the movie magic and the camera angles because, you know, some guys, they were taller than others, you know, and then you have somebody that it's like they're normal 6 foot, 6'2", 6'3", but they made them look bigger, you know. But the way that they did the whole Jason series and how they had the different actors, and of course every series, it's going to be like the Halloween series, every fucking mask was different. But, you know, I hear it all the time. What's your favorite Jason film out of all of them? I would say it has to be 4, 6. You know, part 4, the final chapter. Part 6 was Jason Lives. And then, of course, you got to include Freddy vs. Jason because it's a big-ass crossover. And I got to throw in the reboot. And maybe part 3. I'd say all of them. The only one I really wasn't too fond of was probably like part 7, part 8. Because those ones were a letdown for me as a fan. I don't know how you guys feel about that one, but those ones are kind of let down because of the fact that they say they're this, you know, like Jason's going to be in New York. He was only in it for kind of 20 minutes. It's, I mean, if they would have had a little bit more into it, that would have probably been my favorite, you know. But it was a little different for how they did all the whole Jasons. But as far as the mask goes, I would say the best mask that they did out of all of them has to be the remake because they basically had the mask like the normal hockey mask, but they show that wear and tear and all fucked up, kind of like how my mask is right now that I'm wearing. But then in part 7, they show that it's supposed to be the same mask that he's carried on throughout the whole series. And it's all busted up and you see his zombie-looking face and all that. So, another thing, too, with Jason, as I said, you know, how he was able to handle all that. You know, how can it be believable? I said, in the fact that he wasn't all there, and as far as like missing chromosomes, he wasn't normal. He was able to have high pain tolerance, able to have like crazy amount of strength. So that takes care of that first part. For later on, they did the fact that he was a zombie and he basically had to be put to sleep, and once he was asleep he was dead or kind of not awake and things like that. So I would say that was the theory for part 6, 7, and 8. Part 9, he was a demon. He basically had people possessed and shit, eating his heart, going from different bodies and shit. Freddy versus Jason, they basically brought him back as a demon. You know, Freddy Krueger woke him up. The reboot, I'm going to say the same thing with the reboot, is just, you know, he wasn't all there. He wasn't normal, but he was, you know, he was able to have high pain tolerance and able to handle everything. Now, if they did a sequel out of it, I think they would have explained it a little bit better, you know. It's kind of cool how they did Jason, you know, and that's what made him more crazy and mystifying and unique, was they never explained the reason why he was able to have such crazy strength. He was so quick. I mean, the reboot kind of gave you a little bit of it. Yeah, the underground tunnels and shit, but, you know, later on in the series, like, they never explained how he was so quick. How he could see somebody, then they start running, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's right behind them again, you know? But it was kind of cool how the reboot kind of, you know, answered a lot of questions. It answered a lot, you know? But out of the whole Friday the 13th series, man, I love the whole thing about it. Just everything. I mean, obviously you could tell with all this shit, right? Me born on a Friday the 13th. I told myself, man, I had to do this fucking episode. I had to do one on Friday the 13th. And like I said, you know, I meant to release this episode actually the week before, but like I said, I was under the weather, health reasons and things like that. But I'm back. I'm fine, kicking ass like always, you know. But I want to tell you all, thank you for tuning in to the special 2-part episode of episode 6 on the Friday the 13th series and Jason Voorhees. I'm the SaWGuy. Thank you for all watching and enjoying.
Bow down to